House Clegane. We're starting at the bottom here for a reason. The Cleganes aren't even a real house, not in the way most people think about noble families. They're landed knights. That's it. Their grandfather was a kennel master who saved Titus Lannister from a lion, and suddenly they had land and a sigil. 3 dogs on yellow. The thing is, the Cleganes represent what happens when you give violent men just enough status to be dangerous, but not enough breeding to have restraint. Gregor is a monster. Sandor is broken. Their entire legacy is brutality and trauma. They don't have marriage alliances. They don't have political influence. They don't even have a proper castle. What they have is violence. And in Westeros, sometimes that's enough to get your name remembered. The Cleganes exist to serve greater houses, and that's exactly where they belong in this ranking. House Mormont. Now we're talking about a house that actually commands respect, even if they're poor as dirt. Bear Island is harsh, remote, and produces maybe 60 fighting men on a good day. But those men, and more importantly those women, fight like they're worth 600. The Mormonts have this reputation for loyalty and martial prowess that punches way above their actual power level. Jorah Mormont was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Jorah, for all his flaws and crimes, became one of the most skilled fighters in exile. And Lyanna Mormont in the show became this cultural phenomenon because she represented northern stubbornness distilled into one tiny, fierce package. The problem is, reputation doesn't feed armies. Bear Island can't project power. They can't influence continental politics. They're a footnote in the great game, respected, but ultimately irrelevant to the fate of kingdoms. Their loyalty to the Starks is admirable, but it's also all they have. House Mormont matters because they represent northern values in their purest form, but that's also why they'll never rise higher than this. House Tarly. Here's where we start getting into houses that actually matter on a regional level. The Tarlys are one of the most powerful bannermen to the Tyrells, and they have something most houses would kill for, a Valyrian steel sword. Heartsbane. That alone puts them in a different category. Randyll Tarly is by most accounts one of the finest military commanders in Westeros. He beat Robert Baratheon in battle, which almost nobody can claim. The Tarlys have wealth, land, and martial tradition. But here's the thing that keeps them from ranking higher. They're still bannermen. They're still subordinate. And Randall's cruelty towards Sam shows the limits of their worldview. They're obsessed with martial strength to the point of stupidity. They backed the Tyrells, then they backed Cersei, and in the show they got barbecued by a dragon for their trouble. The Tarlys represent competence without vision. They're great at war, decent at administration, but they lack the political instinct to ever become truly great. They're a strong house trapped in a supporting role. House Dayne. This is one of those houses where the legend is bigger than the reality. House Dayne of Starfall is ancient, going back to the Age of Heroes. They have Dawn, which might not technically be Valyrian steel but is just as legendary. Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, is considered by many to be the greatest knight who ever lived. Ned Stark would have died at the Tower of Joy without Howland Reed's intervention. That's the kind of reputation House Dayne carries. But here's the frustrating part. What have they actually done in the current timeline? They're a Dornish house, sure, but they're not the Martells. They don't rule. They don't command armies that shape the fate of kingdoms. Arthur Dayne died at the Tower of Joy, and with him went most of their relevance to the main story. Ashara Dayne is a tragic footnote. The current Danes barely appear. They're living off past glory, and in Westeros that only gets you so far. House Dayne matters because of what they represent, this chivalric ideal, this connection to ancient history, but they're not players in the game. House Velaryon. Now we're getting into houses that shaped history. The Velaryons are one of the oldest Valyrian families, and unlike the Targaryens, they were already established in Westeros before the Doom. They're seafarers, admirals, masters of the Narrow Sea. During the Dance of the Dragons, Corlys Velaryon was arguably the richest man in the world. The Sea Snake. His fleet was the backbone of Rhaenyra's power. The Velaryons married into the Targaryen line repeatedly. They provided queens and consorts. They were kingmakers. But here's why they're not higher. They rise and fall with the Targaryens. When the dragons died, when Targaryen power waned, the Velaryons faded too. By the time of Robert's rebellion, they're barely mentioned. They're a spent force. Their legacy is real. Their historical importance is undeniable. But they're a house that had their moment, and then slowly declined into irrelevance. House Hightower. This is where we start talking about real power. The Hightowers of Old Town are old money in the most literal sense. They control the oldest, largest, richest city in Westeros. The Citadel is in their city. The Starry Sept was there before the Great Sept of Baelor existed. The Hightower itself is this massive ancient structure that stood for thousands of years. These people have wealth that makes the Lannisters look nouveau rich, and they're smart about it. They don't flaunt their power. They work through influence, through the faith, through the maesters, through marriages. A Hightower was Hand of the King. Alicent Hightower's children became kings. The Dance of the Dragons happened in large part because of Hightower ambition. But here's the thing. They're not a great house in name. They're bannermen to the Tyrells, at least officially, and they've never made that final push for independent power. They're content to be the power behind the throne, the whisper in the king's ear. House Freyr. The Freys control the most strategically important piece of real estate in Westeros, the twins. Every army going north or south has to deal with them. That's leverage. That's power. Walder Frey turned that geographical advantage into wealth, into a massive family, into influence. The problem is, the Freys are new money. They're grasping. They're insecure about their status, and it shows. The Red Wedding was the ultimate expression of that insecurity. Walder Frey broke the most sacred law in Westeros. Guessed right, because he felt disrespected, because Robb Stark broke a marriage pact. The Freys gained Riverrun. They gained legitimacy from the Lannisters, but they lost everything that actually matters. Nobody will ever trust them again. Their name is poison. In the show, Arya wipes them out entirely. House Frey proves that you can have strategic importance, you can have wealth, you can even win in the short term. But if you destroy your honor, you destroy your house. They're high on this list because of their power and position, but they're a cautionary tale about ambition without wisdom. House Bolton. The Boltons are everything dark about the North condensed into one house. They're old as the Starks, and they've been enemies of the Starks for thousands of years. They used to flay the Starks and wear their skins as cloaks. That's their history. The flayed man is their sigil, and it's not metaphorical. Roose Bolton is cold, calculating, pragmatic to the point of sociopathy. Ramsay is pure sadistic evil. The Boltons represent what happens when a house has power but no moral center whatsoever. And here's the thing, they almost won. Roose Bolton's betrayal at the Red Wedding was perfect, clinical. He murdered his king, helped destroy House Stark, and became Warden of the North. For a moment the Boltons were ascendant, but they couldn't hold it. Ramsay's cruelty made enemies everywhere. The North remembers, and what the North remembered was that the Boltons were traitors and monsters. Their fall was inevitable because you can't rule through fear alone, not in the North. The Boltons are high on this list because they came so close to winning, because they were genuinely terrifying, but they're also proof that some houses are too cursed, too hated to ever truly succeed. House Tully. The Tullys are the great house of the Riverlands, and that's both a blessing and a curse. The Riverlands are the most fertile, most populous region in Westeros, but they're also impossible to defend. Every war, every conflict, the Riverlands get devastated. The Tullys have been around since the conquest, raised up by Aegon, and they've been trying to hold the Riverlands together ever since. Their words are family, duty, honor, and you can see that in how they operate. Hoster Tully married his daughters to the Starks and the Arryns to build alliances. Edmure Tully is a decent man who cares about his people. Brynden the Blackfish is one of the best military commanders in the realm. But here's the problem. The Tullys are always reacting, never acting. They're always the ones being invaded, always the ones getting crushed between bigger powers. The War of the Five Kings destroyed them. The Red Wedding happened in their castle. Riverrun fell. The Tully line is barely hanging on by the end. They're a great house in name, but they've been ground down by geography and bad luck. House Greyjoy. The Ironborn are a culture trapped in the past, and the Greyjoys are their leaders. They worship the drowned god. They believe in the old way of reaving and raiding, and they refuse to adapt to a world that's moved on. Balon Greyjoy's first rebellion was crushed. His second rebellion during the War of the Five Kings accomplished nothing except getting him killed. The Greyjoys hold the Iron Islands, which are poor, barren rocks that produce nothing except warriors and ships. But those warriors and that fleet are legitimately dangerous. Euron Greyjoy in the books is a genuinely terrifying figure, a madman with ambition and occult knowledge. In the show, he's more of a pirate rock star, but he's still a threat. The problem with the Greyjoys is that they can raid, they can harass, they can cause chaos, but they can't hold territory, they can't build, they can't create. Theon's entire arc is about trying to figure out who he is when he's caught between the Ironborn way and the way he was raised by the Starks. The Greyjoys are a great house, but they're a dying one. Their culture is unsustainable. Their islands can't support their ambitions. They're dangerous, but they're also doomed. House Martell. Dorne is different. That's the key to understanding the Martells. They were never conquered by Aegon. They joined the Seven Kingdoms through marriage, and they've maintained their independence, their culture, their laws. Women inherit equally in Dorne. They're more sexually liberated. They remember the crimes committed against them, and they hold grudges for generations. Elia Martell was raped and murdered along with her children by Gregor Clegane during the sack of King's Landing, and Dorne has never forgotten. Oberyn Martell almost killed the Mountain in single combat, and his death was one of the most shocking moments in the series. Doran Martell in the books is playing a long game, a patient game, plotting revenge that spans decades. The Martells have wealth, they have a strong defensive position, they have a unique culture that makes them unpredictable, but they're also isolated. Dorne is far from the center of power, their armies are smaller, their influence is limited. In the show, they got reduced to cheap revenge plots and bad dialogue, but in the books, they're still players. The Martells are powerful, they're dangerous, and they represent a path not taken, a culture that survived by being different, but they're not quite at the level of the top houses, because geography and numbers limit what they can actually do. House Arryn. The Eyrie is impregnable. That's the foundation of Arryn power. No army has ever taken the Eyrie by force. It's built into the mountains, accessible only by a narrow path, and during winter it's completely cut off. The Arryns are one of the oldest families in Westeros, descended from the first men and the Andals. They ruled the Vale as kings of Mountain and Vale for thousands of years. Jon Arryn was Hand of the King to Robert Baratheon, and his death is what kicks off the entire series. The Vale is rich, fertile, and populous. The Knights of the Vale are some of the best heavy cavalry in Westeros. But here's the thing, the Arryns are cautious to a fault. Lisa Arryn kept the Vale out of the War of the Five Kings entirely. She was paranoid, unstable, and selfish, and it neutered one of the most powerful regions in Westeros. By the time the Knights of the Vale finally enter the war in the show, it's to save Jon Snow at the Battle of the Bastards. But it feels like too little too late. The Arryns have everything they need to be a dominant force, but they lack the will to use it. They're reactive, defensive, isolated. House Arryn has enormous potential, but their actual impact on the story is limited by their own fear and insularity. House Baratheon. This is the house that won. Robert Baratheon led a rebellion that overthrew a dynasty that had ruled for 300 years. He killed Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat at the Trident. He took the Iron Throne. The Baratheons of Storm's End are an old house, founded by Orys Baratheon, rumored to be Aegon the Conqueror's bastard brother. They're strong, martial, proud. Robert's rebellion reshaped Westeros entirely. But here's the tragedy. Robert was a great warrior and a terrible king. He bankrupted the realm. He ignored his duties. His marriage to Cersei was a disaster, and none of his sons were actually his. The Baratheon line was destroyed by Robert's own failures. Stannis was the rightful king by law, rigid and uncompromising, and he lost everything. Renly was charismatic but impatient, and he got murdered by shadow magic. By the end, the Baratheon name is extinct in the main line. The house that won the throne couldn't hold it for even 20 years. House Baratheon achieved the ultimate victory, but they couldn't sustain it. They proved that winning the throne and keeping the throne are two very different things. House Tyrell. The Tyrells are the richest house in Westeros. The Reach is the most fertile land, the most populous region, and the Tyrells control it all from Highgarden. They can field the largest armies, they have the most food, and they're smart. They're political players in a way most houses aren't. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, is one of the sharpest political minds in the series. Margaery Tyrell played the game better than almost anyone, marrying 3 kings and nearly securing her position as queen. The Tyrells allied with the Lannisters when it suited them, then turned on them when it didn't. But here's the thing about the Tyrells. They're upjumped stewards. They were never kings. They were the stewards to House Gardner, and when the Gardners died at the Field of Fire, the Tyrells surrendered Highgarden to Aegon and got rewarded for it. There's always been this sense that they're not quite legitimate, that they're social climbers, And in the show, Cersei wipes them out in one move by blowing up the Sept of Baelor. The Tyrells have wealth and power, but they lack the deep roots, the ancient legitimacy that the oldest houses have. They're players, but they're vulnerable in ways they don't fully understand until it's too late. House Lannister. Hear me roar. The Lannisters are the richest house in Westeros, or at least they were until the mines ran dry, which is a book detail that adds a whole layer of desperation to their actions. Casterly Rock is one of the greatest fortresses in the world. The Lannisters were kings of the Rock for thousands of years. They have a legacy of wealth, power, and cunning. Tywin Lannister is arguably the most effective ruler in the series, brutal, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless. He orchestrated the Red Wedding. He crushed his enemies. He restored his house's reputation after his father nearly destroyed it. The Lannisters under Tywin controlled the Iron Throne through Joffrey and Tommen. They seemed untouchable, but the cracks were always there. Tyrion killed Tywin. Cersei's paranoia and cruelty destroyed their alliances. Jaime's character arc takes him away from his family. The Lannister children are all broken in different ways, and by the end the house is a shadow of what it was. The Lannisters prove that you can have all the wealth and power in the world, but if your family is dysfunctional, if your leader dies, if your gold runs out, it all falls apart. They dominated the series, but they're also a cautionary tale about the limits of ruthlessness and the cost of cruelty. House Stark. Winter is coming. The Starks are the heart of the story. They're the moral center. They're the protagonists. They've ruled the North for 8,000 years, longer than any other house has ruled anywhere. They built Winterfell. They're descended from Bran the Builder. They have direwolves. They have warging abilities. They have a connection to the old gods and the ancient magic of Westeros that no other house can match. The North is harsh and poor, but it's vast, and the Northerners are loyal in a way that Southerners can't understand. Ned Stark's honor got him killed, but it also inspired loyalty that outlasted his death. The North remembered. Robb Stark was king in the North. Jon Snow became king in the North. Sansa Stark became queen in the North in the show. The Starks were destroyed, scattered, broken, and they came back. That's the thing about the Starks. You can kill them, you can defeat them, but the idea of the Starks, the legacy, it endures. They represent the old ways, honor, duty, family. They're not the richest or the most powerful in terms of raw resources, but they're the most resilient. The Starks are the house the entire story revolves around, and they prove that some things matter more than wealth or armies. House Targaryen. Fire and blood. The Targaryens are the reason Westeros is united. Before Aegon's conquest, there were 7 kingdoms constantly at war. Aegon and his sisters came with 3 dragons and forged one realm through fire and blood. The Targaryens ruled for 300 years. They had dragons, they had Valyrian steel, they had prophecy and magic in their blood. They married brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure. They were more than human, or at least they thought they were. And for a long time, they were right. But the dragons died. The magic faded. The Targaryens went mad. Aerys II, the Mad King, burned people alive and heard voices. Robert's rebellion ended their rule. By the start of the series, the Targaryens are extinct, except for 2 exiles across the narrow sea. But then Daenerys hatches 3 dragons. She brings magic back into the world. She conquers cities, frees slaves, builds armies. She's the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons. The Targaryens went from extinct to the most powerful force in the world again. The show ending turned her into a mass murderer in 2 episodes. But that doesn't erase what the Targaryens represent. They're the house that shaped the world. Every other house exists in the shadow of what the Targaryens built. Jon Snow is a secret Targaryen, and that secret is central to the entire endgame. The Targaryens sit at the top because they're not just a house, they're a force of nature, a dynasty that defined an age, and even in their absence, even in their fall, the world is still shaped by what they were and what they might become again.